Bum, ba-dum, bum. Alrighty, whoa. Testing Twitch 123 123.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yep, you're good there. YouTube. Yep, we are good.
Here we get started.
Dessert.
Hello and welcome to episode 199 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the first week of the 2026 Call of Duty League season. The first week's matches are completed, and we have quite a bit to talk about on tonight's show. As a result, we also have some map pool changes that were very much not expected, that obviously dropped the day after our last show, as Ego Chall Podcast tradition dictates. And we got some other stuff we will probably talk about during the course of the show. Before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Yeah, doing all right. First weekend of matches for Black Ops 7 in the books. I don't know if there were too many things that were necessarily unexpected. Maybe one of the results today um, caught some people by surprise, but other than that, it was pretty straightforward. There were some issues on day one, as you kind of alluded to. There was a map pool due to the season one update. They had to remove one of the hardpoint maps, and then during the middle of one of the matches on Friday, there was like an hour plus delay because a patch went live, and it like broke the game for a little bit. So the game was just down and they couldn't play. So that delay was kind of a bummer and kind of killed some momentum for the first day. But it is what it is. Should have expected that something like that would pop up and it wouldn't be completely smooth sailing. But other than that, it was pretty much by the book. So ready to jump right in and break it all down.
Yeah, the big thing we should talk about before is the map pool, because this affected all of the week's matches, and this was not something that had really been thought about, obviously, because it wasn't expected. I don't think the developers certainly anticipate that they'll completely break a map and have to make a big change like this as a result. But Blackheart was removed from the CDL map pool for, I think, the foreseeable future, basically, until they can fix the map. The devs said that it had been removed from public and private map pools while they investigate an issue, and that will return in an upcoming update. So obviously, it being in the CDL map rotation made it pretty. I mean, I just looked at the comments of that tweet where I think it was the CDL, and basically all the pros were like, what's going on? And I mean, that was literally the day before the first matches of the 2026 season. So what did you think of this? Because this is obviously a huge change to, I'm sure what a lot of these teams were expected to do in their first week's matches.
Yeah, I genuinely can't remember a time where a map was removed from public and private matches. Like, it's just not in the game. The only thing that comes close in comparison to me is there was that racetrack map in was that MW2, the sequel MW2? I don't remember. The one it had Greenberg Hotel and the race car map, and there was like legal issues with like
Yeah.
the devs using those, and like they weren't allowed to use the racetrack map in competitive um because of that, and like it wasn't selectable in private matches for a little bit. I'm pretty sure I remember. So, but like I don't remember there ever being another instance where a map was straight up basically like deleted from the game. Like
Yeah.
there have been times where there have been issues that pop up and other stuff like they've temporarily disabled a map from ranked play or the CDL, or they've done it with a gun or attachments maybe here and there over the years. But I cannot remember an instance like this where the map is just effectively not in the game anymore. So that was pretty crazy to me. I truthfully didn't look into it much more beyond that. I didn't like. I mean, I'm assuming it has to be a pretty like game
Significant.
breaking
Yeah.
issue in order for it to go to these lengths. But I didn't look into it much to see exactly what's going on, so I don't know much more um, beyond that. But it just like the ramifications from a CDL and perspective is the veto system in an interesting spot where there's effectively 4 hardpoint maps now as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
5, and you know that just means that an extra map isn't like being considered in that process, and that if it's still early, don't get me wrong, this would be a much bigger deal if it was happening closer to champs where some of these teams have their map pools ironed out and stuff. But I mean, there is a chance that some of these teams were good at Blackheart
Yeah.
very early on and were anticipating playing it in these first matches, and they just didn't get that opportunity. um Conversely, I'm just going to use a team like Miami for an example because we talked about them uh, last episode and in previous episodes. They had like the visa situation with Trakes, and they Trakes ended up playing this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
but based on what we know from public announcements and stuff, it's undoubted that Miami wasn't able to practice with their full team as much as some of these other teams. A change like this can help a team like a Miami who might not have practiced that map as much as another team. It also could have hurt them if they were one of the teams that were better at it, but you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a double-edged sword in that regard. It's just a weird situation, and it literally, like you said, it happens with the season 1 um update coming on December 4th, and the match is starting on December 5th. We even talked about it. I don't think we talked about it last episode. I think it slid under the radar a little bit. We talked about it before, like saying like the season 1 update, the players might not play um, on that patch. They might play on the older patch beforehand, but it turns out they did end up playing on the new patch because there also was a change to overload where the person carrying the device could only use their pistol while carrying that device, and they implemented that in the season 1 update. And then so like players had less than a day to actually get acclimated to that pistol change. And I know some people were pretty vocal about not being a huge fan of that, and it did, in my opinion, I haven't watched a ton of overload, um, but it did feel like it was slowing down that mode a little bit, and teams were just being a little more patient, trying to set up pushes, and it kind of felt like, a little bit of a battle in the trenches for offensive and defensive line in football. Like, the front line was trying to establish a push while the ball carrier was just sitting in the back with the pistol. And if those guys died, pistol guy with the device had to back up a little bit. If they got that first set of kills, and they could push up and move the line forward a little bit, and then they would spawn and run in. So it did seem to slow it down a little bit. Again, not sure if that's just a case of players not being used to the pistol change in that mode. Is still a new mode in general, so not a ton of time for anybody to practice it when it's a brand new mode in the game. But yeah, nonetheless, a little bit of a shenanigans going on with this update happening, and the impact on Blackheart. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that the situation develops. I even saw Jacob Hale in response to CDL's tweet saying like put raid hardpoint in temporarily. I could see them doing something like that, especially with um, some of the new maps that got added with the season 1 update. If they wanted to temporarily add something, I know we talked about it on a previous episode that they weren't anticipating making map pool changes till after Major 1, but we don't know how long this Blackheart situation is going to go on, and that could need to be addressed in some capacity before Major 1.
Yeah. The only saving grace for them is they only have 1 week of qualifiers to go until the big break. So they'll
Yep.
have basically a month off in between week 2 and week 3 of the qualifiers. So maybe they just wait. They just roll with the 4 hardpoint maps for this coming week 2, and they just deal with it, and then hope something kind of works out in the month in between, then they can actually get Blackheart back in. Or at that point, maybe they would bring in Raid if they believe that Blackheart won't be fixed by the time that the third week of qualifiers begins. But yeah, it's down to 4 hardpoint maps. So there's 4 hardpoint, 3 overload, and 5 S&D maps. The other hardpoint maps are Colossus, Den, Exposure, and Scar. So yeah, that's a huge thing, and like you, I don't remember any time that this has happened. Especially like not just it's disabled and competitive, but like everything, public and private matches, it's not even available to play, which is very very weird, and it makes you think that it had to be literally something so game breaking that it they didn't even want people to play on it at all, which is not usual for Call of Duty maps. It's more usual in other esports or other games where there's a gigantic bug. Call of Duty doesn't really typically get those nearly as much, just stuff that really frustrates people like spawns. And but I don't know, like this is a very odd situation. Hopefully it does get resolved soon, and like you said, it's gonna assuredly benefit some teams and hurt other teams. If you were really good, like you mentioned, if you're really good at Blackheart Hardpoint and now it's not in the game, like that just sucks for you. If you were really bad at it and it's not in the game now, and that's a huge boon for you. It should make life a lot easier for yourself. It will also change just how these teams practice it. I'm sure. I don't imagine anybody like all the time that they practice Blackheart over the past few weeks. Now that time gets dedicated to one fewer map, and I think that might make hardpoint maps maybe better, just because the teams don't have to focus on as much. I don't know. Maybe that'll kind of bore itself out. But I'm interested to see how it will affect moving forward. Obviously, it's just this is so wild that it happened the day before the CDL began. I think if you give teams a week to prepare for it, it might be a little bit of a different situation. The only other like big thing that wasn't like actually game related, or I guess match related, was Rambo. I don't know if you saw that that Twitter video from Rambo Ray, where he said that he is now a father, and that is why he's been not coaching recently. But he did say that he didn't really give like a timetable or anything, but he did say that he wanted to get back into coaching and that he planned to as soon as he felt comfortable as a dad. So first of all, congratulations to Rambo Ray and his wife. That's really awesome. That does explain why he is not in the CDL this year. I think he said like his daughter was born like the day after EWC or something like that. So yeah, that's really awesome. I think a lot of teams probably could use him. Any team kind of pop out to you as like a potential Rambo Ray squad? Because obviously Vancouver was one of the best teams in the league last year, and he was the head coach. I don't know if he won a world championship with Dallas, but not with OpTic because he was out that year. So former world champion coach. Any team kind of jump out to you as potentially one that could use him either as a head or assistant coach?
At Atura during Vancouver's match this weekend, and I think it was after the S&D, because they do like so it had to have been after the S&D. They go to like the desk, in which was Puckett, Alley Cat, and Nameless, and he was like, we got to get Rambo Ray back on Vancouver because these guys don't have any fundamentals or something like that, paraphrasing what Puckett said. So that was kind of ironic that you brought that up, and I thought I heard that maybe I was just in one of Zuma's streams and Rambo was helping with the Stallions or something like that, but he doesn't have anything like, it's a weird situation there because it's not like Zuma's like paying coaches as far as I know or anything like that, so I wouldn't expect like a formal announcement from Rambo Ray saying he's coaching the Stallions, but maybe that's just a situation where he's able to help out with a challengers team there while he's dealing with the newborn and whatnot. And then if as the season progresses, as some of these bottom teams are in a situation where they could use some help, they might reach out to him. One team that I guess I could see. Again, it's kind of similar to the discussion we had last episode where we're talking about like the first team to make a roster change, or that would have been 2 episodes ago. There are some of these teams at the bottoms who could make a change, but they most likely won't due to monetary issues or whatnot. So the one name uh, that jumps out to me would be a team like Falcons if they're struggling. They got Clayster as a coach, and obviously he's worked with Rambo in the past where Rambo was coaching him, and they might have even teamed together for a little bit, like way back in the day, maybe in like the OG MW2 or something like that. And if they didn't, they obviously played together, played against each other many times, and uh, had that run there with the Dallas Empire when Ray was coaching and Clay was playing still. So that seems like a natural fit if Rambo was looking for a position where he's not the sole coach and he just wants to jump in and help out. Um, any of the other bottom teams, it would be like you could look at a team like C9 where they have the reports of potentially very low spending this year. Like they could probably use somebody like Rambo to help out if things aren't going great. But then the question becomes, will they actually spend to acquire Rambo services? So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But obviously, I've sung Rambo's praises plenty of times on this podcast over the years. Think very highly of him and his mind for Call of Duty. So he'd be an asset to any team that's willing to pay up for him.
Yeah, I think it might be a situation where it's kind of like accuracy when he came in and was like reportedly helping OpTic for champs. What was that, 2 years ago now? I think he might do something like that. I don't know if a lot of teams are going to decide to replace their head coach or
Yeah.
even add an assistant coach like early in the season. But yeah, obviously, like you said, he's one of the smartest guys in Call of Duty esports history. So it makes sense for him to be involved. I did think of FaZe just because obviously they merged the FaZe roster with the Vancouver roster and he knows the
I like
guys
that.
there. They have a great coaching staff, like with RJ and Crowder, like world champion coaching staff. But I think if they were just looking to add something, as an assistant, I think that would be interesting. Paris would also be an interesting one because obviously Neptune is there. Rambo did an incredible job. Granted, we don't know what coaches really do on a day-to-day basis, but like the results are there, and it seemed like they had a pretty good working relationship. So I'm very interested. I would imagine at least next season, when like if he wants to come back full time, I would imagine that he gets his own team, and somebody lets him kind of take over because Vancouver was such a success last year, and then he's obviously had so much success with OpTic and the Dallas Empire previously. So it would make a lot of sense for him to get back into it. I think the only other stuff is challengers related. So OpTic, they had been kind of flirting with like an OpTic Academy challengers team. And it has officially been announced that they have rebranded their challengers team to the Huntsman, obviously bringing back the Chicago Huntsman branding that they had initially from the beginning of the CDL back in 2020. The roster is Renegade, who is a Halo Pro, a Halo World Champion, Neum, Kips, and Respi. So I don't know. Like I've heard of Renegade. I've never heard of the other guys. That's not to say anything about them. That's just I do not pay attention to challengers whatsoever. I think it's interesting though. I know there were a few different iterations of this alleged OpTic Academy or OpTic Challengers team. There were supposed to be like Bound was supposed to be on the team, and
Yeah.
then I think he's not even playing in Challengers
Correct.
anymore. So there were definitely a few different options for this roster. It's interesting to kind of give three relative unknowns a spot on not technically an OpTic team, like because it doesn't have like the OpTic branding, but still like it's an OpTic adjacent thing. And then Renegade, who I believe is like one of the best Halo players in the world. So always love when the Halo guys come over. Any kind of feelings? Obviously, I don't think you know any more than me on this kind of roster, but just overall thoughts on OpTic's or Huntsman's Challengers roster.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up the Bound situation.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like he very quickly dabbled with competitive COD and then decided it's not for him, and he's not competing in COD right now. So maybe he comes back at the later point. Maybe he goes back to Halo. We'll have to wait and see. But um, Yeah, other than that, the only thing I gotta say is I'm just a huge fan of the Huntsman brand being used. We've talked about it now with the other rebrands that have happened recently, like most likely with the Rocker, even Toronto Ultra to some extent. Like some of the recent rebrands, it's like those are some of our favorite brands, and to have them just effectively not in use kind of sucks. But this is a case here where the Huntsman brand hasn't been in use for a couple years now, and OpTic found a way to bring it back and make use of it, which I'm a fan of. I think, maybe it's the old head in me, but I think most people thought if there were to be a second OpTic team get an actual name, it was going to be OpTic Nation, just because it was OpTic Gaming and OpTic Nation. Those are
Yeah.
the two teams back in the day. Um, but maybe that's something to do with like the rule or the CDL like name rule stuff where you can't have more than one team or whatever. So this is a good workaround of that if that is the case. And I like Huntsman being in use. I think I saw Easy Mac tweet something about tweeted at Hastro saying like, does this mean you're got to bring Dallas Empire back for challengers too? So there are some options for some of these other orgs and stuff if they do want to make use of those brands that aren't in use anymore. So this could be a good step forward in that sense from a brand perspective.
And the other stuff was challengers. Lynn's Cobra, Brezzi, their team won the European or Middle Eastern North Africa Challengers Cup. I don't believe the NA one is over. 2 hours ago, the Telluride Bush account tweeted that TJ's team is in the grand finals against one of the Falcons Academy teams. I think Falcons Academy White. Which I did see Jersey Jerry's tweet earlier.
Yep.
You want to give
He tweeted
a blow by blow
he
breakdown of his crash out?
he tweeted at to quote him, Daniel to say, not Daniel say, Daniel to say, which was my favorite part of the rant even before he actually got into it. Um, and I don't know like the exact details, but apparently some other team that's maybe they got to be like one of the teams in the losers finals that would end up potentially playing TJ and crew in the grand finals of the NA Challengers Cup. Some players are like playing in a local LAN or something like that while
Yeah.
this Challengers Cup is going on. And Jersey Jerry's like, it's funny coming from Jersey Jerry because he doesn't know like this is something that it to a lot of COD fans is like, yeah, it sucks, but playing in multiple tournaments, that's the thing that's happened for 2 decades now at this point. But he like just like you fully crashed out and he's like, yeah, what the hell's going on? Like we need a forfeit, we need a ruling or something like that. I don't want my players getting iced. And yeah, I don't know if there's been a resolution yet or if TJ and crew are actually playing, but they're in the finals for the NA Cup. It wouldn't be great if they ended up losing because they had to wait a couple hours, but that maybe lead to some more funny content from Jersey Jerry and the Bush team. So I guess stay tuned for more developments on that. Maybe by the time we're wrapping up here tonight, we'll know more about what's going on there.
Yeah, that team's Capsule, Prolute, Spartan, TJ, and obviously Temp is like
Yep.
their coach. The Falcons Academy White team is Arcides, GNTL, Saudi player.
He wasn't playing.
Okay. King of Bodhi, Paul X,
Yep.
and Priesta. So
Yep.
quite a few familiar names on that team, and that's the finals of the North American Challengers Cup, which,
Oh, they are in the finals.
yeah.
Oh, they played against them in the winners finals, I think.
And then they dropped down to losers and then came back up. So,
Okay. So I didn't know that already happened. So I don't know what team Jersey Jerry was talking about. I don't think it was them. It must have been the other team that they had to play against. But yeah.
no idea. I just saw the tweet from the Bush Gaming account that was the grand finals, and that was 2 or 3 hours ago when they tweeted that. So they could be on like map 2 of that series.
No.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I saw an old tweet.
Yeah, they beat that team 3-2. That was 2 hours ago.
Oh, okay.
And they said grand finals bound. So that was
okay.
they dropped down they haven't played the grand finals yet. I've been trying to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, so COD Gamepedia has the bracket. I don't know how updated it is, like if it's like updated currently.
I don't think it is.
But Falcons White was gonna play the winner of Two Real Geo Awakening and Yuli versus Icons KB Millie and Rupert. So that was gonna be the losers finals, and then winner would play Bush.
Yes.
who knows at
Yeah.
this point? I mean, this is just the challengers experience of like some of
Yeah.
these tournaments are probably going to take forever. I do think it's funny that somebody is talking about it that has like somewhat of a brand, but maybe it'll change as a result of this. I'm not entirely convinced of that, but we'll see what happens. Let's get into the CDL matches, though. Enough of the challengers. Obviously, this was the first week of the 2026 CDL season on Black Ops 7. Friday, December 5th was the beginning of the season, and we started off with OpTic Texas versus the Riyadh Falcons, and it went pretty much how we expected it, I guess. Like, it was a 3-0 for OpTic. We both picked OpTic. Two-time defending world champions. The Falcons were the only only CDL team to lose to a challengers team in the Monsters preseason invitational. And it kind of looked like that, to be quite honest. We've talked about it a lot, that the biggest question mark for the Falcons, because they're such a talented roster, but the biggest question mark would be Exnid, and if he's kind of up to snuff with this team. He wasn't up to snuff like at all in this match, but neither was my boy Kiz. Really, neither was Celium. Like, Celium had a .85. I don't know the last time that he's had a .85 KD in any series. And they got swept. So any overall thoughts other than OpTic kind of coming out of the gates pretty strong here?
Yeah, I think that was the one thing, even a little bit this weekend, watching Celium, like his individual numbers just weren't what we're accustomed to, and obviously different team, different environment, different players to play off of. Maybe that's all having an impact. I don't know. Um, but yeah, like coming out of the gates, the first hard point was pretty close. Like I'm pretty sure Falcons was up like 130 to 100 or something in that vicinity. It was close early, and then Optics just pulled away late. I think maybe the search got to like 3-3 or 4-3 or something like that, and then Optic pulled away there too. But then obviously the overload wasn't necessarily close, and even in the end, the first hard point, an almost 100-point loss doesn't like look close on paper, but the
Mm.
beginning of the first two maps were probably a little closer than I think people were probably anticipating, just because a lot of people, like you said, were expecting an Optic 3-0 stomp here, and that's what we end up getting. But just the individual maps in parts were probably a little closer, and then Optic was just able to pull away. So I did find that a little interesting. I just, again, first maps and really first opportunity to get a true glimpse of Falcons, because I didn't even I we know we talked about them in the monster tournament. I didn't actually see any of their POV. Maybe I saw like a little bit of them when they played Phase, but um, outside of that, I don't really remember too much of watching them before this. So yeah, I think that's the Xnit situation is just something we're gonna have to keep an eye on to see what type of leash they give him. If they continue to struggle, will they be proactive in trying to make an upgrade there, make a splash in free agency of some kind, or are they going to ride it out and try and make things work with this current team? So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, overall, I guess too, I did actually mean to say this to you before we started recording. I think Maven mentioned it on Saturday that another breaking news for something being in Call of Duty, but like something's going on with the scoreboard, and especially in Search and Destroy, like the first life isn't being tracked in some of the stats and stuff. So some people's individual stats might be off by like a few kills or a few deaths here and there, but overall they should be um, in the general vicinity of what we say going through these matches. But as we always say on the Ego Chall Podcast, the stats aren't everything, and you got to look beyond the stats and take a closer look at what's going on, more than that. So that's something to keep in mind for anybody seeing some of these numbers, and something like, let's just use Celium, for example, dropping a .85. It might not have actually been a .85, but it definitely wasn't like a 1.2, which is what we've accustomed to see from him. So, we talked about it on the preview episode. Tough opening week of matches for Falcons, and next week, at least on paper, they do seemingly have some winnable matches. So I think that'll be a better test of what we can expect from Falcons this year.
Stats aren't everything, but Merck was kind of going crazy a little bit.
Oh yeah.
He had a 1.8 for the series. He 26 and 18 in hardpoint, 12 and 4 in search, and then 25 and 13 in the overload. Shotzi had 33 in the overload, and he also had 10 kills in the S&D. I mean, what else can you say? Like at least in one match, and obviously we'll get to the second match, but like the first match of the season, you're like, yeah, I feel good about the MVP pick at this point. Anything else on OpTic versus Falcons before we move on?
No, we'll talk about Merc MVP case later, but especially his match today, I got some. It got me really excited about that MVP pick.
Second match of the year, Carolina versus Boston. And I should never doubted my boys, my Breach boys. They win 3-1. They beat Carolina. The only map they lose is a round 11 Scar S&D. This was a pretty close series. Like regardless, it wasn't as close in the first hard point, but then again round 11 S&D. They go to round 5 Overload on Den, and then 250 to 214 exposure hard point. This wasn't even the Snoopy show. This was the Nasty show. He was absolutely nasty in this game or in this match. Drops a 1.4 KD, and I feel very bad about my Paris Legion Memorial Award prediction now. Not saying that it won't come to fruition, but this was definitely a great first win, especially with how well Carolina played in the preseason tournament. And also Snoopy, another dub against Slasher. We're creating the narrative that Snoopy won the trade. What did you think of this first win for Boston?
Yeah, actually, that was the first thing I noticed in this series was Snoopy got off to a 1-12 start in map 1, and I was kind of like, this is just like
it's the worst.
Unreal. I was like, what the hell's going on here? And he definitely picked it up as the map went on. But that the general gist of map 1, it was pretty close for a large portion of it, kind of similar to map 1 between OpTic and Falcons. But what I really noticed in it was it felt like Carolina was good at rotating early and trying to set up on the hard point, even if they had control of the current hard point and they lost it for the last like 10 seconds. They were doing a good job rotating, setting up at the next hard point, but Boston was just nailing them in the breaks, and just like, although Carolina was setting up, which is something you would expect a slasher team to do well, play fundamental COD, rotate, all that, yada yada. Boston was just like, yeah, screw that. We're just gonna hit you headstrong and break your setups and beat you that way. So that was pretty much how I felt like the general flow of map 1 was there. The map 2 search, I think early, I don't remember what the lead was, but I thought like Carolina was going to run away with the search, and that was going to be like my thing for this. I was going to be like, okay, it's going to be a year where Slashers just got another good S&D team, and that's going to be their path to victory. But then Boston did claw their way back in, forced around 11, but Carolina clutched it up in the end. And then we had that super long delay that I was talking about earlier in the show after that map 2, and that took forever. So that could have had an impact on the outcome of the last 2 maps. It might not have either, but either way, Boston was able to take a close win on Den Overload there, 3-2, and then they win 250-214 on Exposure Hardpoint in a game where Lurks and Craze, noteworthy, making their CDL debuts. They actually had the top 2 kills in the lobby for that map 4 there, but it's a case of Boston getting outslayed and winning regardless. So overall, just a pretty interesting series to get a feel of what we might be able to expect from both of these teams, but it is a small sample size, so we'll see how it progresses against other teams. But interesting debuts too from Lurks and Craze. Got to see Lurks put up some decent numbers in the slaying department, at least early on. And I think they mentioned on the broadcast too that Lurks was a Halo kid before like doing challengers last year. I don't know much beyond that, but they mentioned that. I think Puckett maybe did. So that was the first time I heard that, and I just knew about him like being on Zuma Stallions team or whatever beforehand. So that was kind of interesting too.
And then the final match on Friday, I personally thought this was the most interesting going in, just because I don't really believe in LAT as a team. FaZe obviously had a pretty similarly horrible way to end last season, and then they make these roster changes. They don't have Celium, they don't have a Beezy. Now LAT has a Beezy. So there were just a lot of questions that I felt probably were going to be answered in this match, especially against each other. And this was a really great match. This is really competitive, kind of what you might expect of an LAT versus FaZe matchup regardless, even with the different rosters. But LAT ends up sweeping the series, even though I think we would both agree that the individual maps probably would not say that this is like a huge disparity between the two teams. 250, 225 hard point win for LAT, 6-4 S&D win, and then a 5-4 exposure overload win. Simp drops 30 for the loss in overload. The S&D was just a really weird S&D. Like if you look at the stats, and I know like obviously you said the Codcaster stuff might throw it off a little bit, but still, like, I mean, it definitely seems weird. Simp had 37. I don't know if you're keeping track of how many, like what's the most kills this season, but this is certainly one of the higher kill counts of the first week. But 37 for the loss. Draza had 19, went 19 and 31. Abizi had 32. So the Tiny Terrors on opposite teams going for nearly 70 combined. A weird match, obviously, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about FaZe in their second match of the week as well. But overall thoughts on this result, and LAT starting off this new era with a win.
Yeah, we can talk more about both these teams later on too. There's an interesting stat I saw about BZ that we'll talk about for his second match of the weekend. But yeah, kind of overall, like you said, I think this was a little closer than might have even been expected, just because we saw LAT beat FaZe in the preseason already. So we were both expecting LAT to win, and FaZe did put up a good fight, and that's kind of something we talked about previously. Maybe like the general adrenaline of actually playing like a CDL match or something like that, maybe having an impact. I don't really know, but obviously the first official match between a BZ and Simp, having whether that played a role in either player like trying to show up or whatever, maybe that's something there too. I don't really know, but end of the day, 25-point hard point, a 6-4 in the search, where LAT won 5 straight rounds after being down 1-4, and then the 5-4 win in the overload where FaZe was down 1-4, came back to go 4-4 and force OT in the map 3, and then a BZ like just made like a hero play and like ran with the device and ran straight to the base of FaZe to punch in the final cap there. I thought that was kind of fitting, like a BZ like literally like ending the first showdown with Simp in their career, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, we'll get to it more with FaZe's other match, but it really felt like Simp needed some help in this series, and he wasn't getting it. I think Draza struggled pretty much all weekend, statistically at least, looking at his KDs for both series. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. But they were tough matches for FaZe, and it started with a tough matchup here against LAT, and we'll talk more about both these squads in a bit.
Let's just loop in FaZe's second match, because then we could kind of wrap up. So they played Paris on the second, their second match. They played them earlier today, and we both picked Paris. I think who did we both pick? LAT? Yeah, we both picked LAT to beat FaZe, and we both picked Paris to beat FaZe here. FaZe ends up winning 3-2. This is also a weird series because Paris just absolutely dominated the hard points. 250 to 149, 250 to 130. So FaZe, they go 0-3 in hard point this weekend because they lose to LAT 250 to 225 on, what was that, Den hard point. and then they come in and they play Den again to start the series against Paris, and then they play Exposure in the second hardpoint. So despite going 0-3 in hardpoint this weekend, they win one of these maps because they win 6-3 S&D on Scar, 6-0 S&D on Den, which is crazy, and then 6-1 Exposure Overload. I guess there's two different phases right now. Like, and we've seen this before. There have been times throughout the years where they're very, very good at hardpoint, but then they really struggle in S&D. There have been times where they've been really good at S&D and they've struggled in the respawns. It seems like that is the case here to start the season, at least. Against two, I would say, two of the top 4 teams in the league. So that should be noted. But what do you make of the first week? And obviously, FaZe getting what I think we would both consider an upset win over Paris earlier today.
Yeah, I think that was, something that caught my attention here was just like the fact that FaZe was able to get a Neslo basically and winning 2 searches to uh, win this match that both of us expected Gentlemates to take based on how they looked heading into this showdown. I think that does speak volumes to the potential of this FaZe team. I think at the same time, it does bring up an interesting case of maybe the hard point is going to be a weakness. And Nameless actually today, I think it was on the post match breakdown of FaZe versus Gentlemates. He kind of alluded to like early Vancouver last year struggling in hardpoint. Then obviously they bring Neptune in and they became a really, really strong hardpoint team. Um, you would think like Simp and Neptune there kind of like somewhat interchangeably in terms of like a slaying impact. Maybe it's different from a playstyle perspective, but nonetheless, like it is a new team, so maybe it's just going to take a little bit of time for this FaZe team to figure some stuff out in hardpoint. But we know they got the pieces to be a good hardpoint team. It's just going to be a matter of whether they're able to put it together, and it's also the fact that they're playing 2 of the top 4 teams, no matter how you look at it or how you want to argue it. I think the top 4 in everyone's mind right now has to be OpTic, LAT, Paris, and FaZe in no particular order there. So, maybe it's a case of we see FaZe play some of the other teams and they stop them in the hard point, but it's against these other top, quote unquote, top teams. They might have to work more in the hard point to figure stuff out. Again, small sample size, so it's natural for people and even us to overreact to some results, but I do think Draza, again in particular, struggled statistically in this series as well as both series this weekend, so that definitely caught my attention. The 9 and 25 performance in the map 4 in particular, like you see single digits in a hard point from someone like Draza, who's been a pretty good respawn player over the years. That definitely caught my attention and probably caught the eyes of some Draza haters or people who like to talk trash to him, which he's got coming because he definitely likes to talk trash. But um, nonetheless, I think that's one thing we'll have to keep an eye on is how whether Draza steps it up in the upcoming matchups and whatnot. But I do think this was a very solid win for FaZe, especially the alternative was, as we talked about last episode, FaZe starting the season 0-2 for the second consecutive year, having to, dig themselves out of a hole potentially before the first tournament. They're not in that position, and this is a good win in a series or a set of qualifiers where, like a tiebreaker could be the difference between seeding and in some capacity. If FaZe and Gentlemates are like both 5-2 or something, FaZe will potentially have that tiebreaker in the head-to-head and potentially get a higher seed, and that changes the matchups or something. I don't really know, but um, yeah, huge win for FaZe. Definitely got questions about the hard point. Definitely like to see uh, them getting it done in S&D, which is something really shouldn't have been surprising to anyone. Like that's what Simp grew up on, and that's what Simp was known for all these years, and maybe people just forgot it because FaZe have been so good with the former Dynasty team and all that, and then they really didn't like sit back and think like, yeah, this Simp kid's pretty good at S&D. Maybe he'll carry for it, but obviously Simp played well in all the modes. But it's now just a case where, especially where we're seeing a new era for FaZe and the ramifications of that, the Celium and Abizi and Simp trio splitting up. Seeing Simp play without those guys for the first time in the CDL is interesting, and we're gonna have to look at how it all shakes out for all of those. And so far, at least, I mean, Simp was putting up pretty good numbers for a guy playing with brand new guys for the first time.
Yeah, I think this match in particular, or I think really both the matches, because he performed individually well against LAT
Yeah,
as well. It showed me two things. The first was Simp was kind of like an NBA player where they've been on like a competitive team for a long time, and then they like go through not even like a rebuild, but like they just shuffle in or shuffle out a bunch of players, shuffle in a bunch of new players, but there's like one constant, and that's like the superstar player, and like you get to see how great of a player they are still, because they're not kind of hidden by some of the other stuff that they've like the system that they've been in for so long. And I felt like that with Simp today. Like he's been in this system where in some ways he's kind of sacrificed a little bit, especially for Celium, because Celium is it's like such a dominant slayer with the AR that sometimes Simp kind of gets overshadowed in that way. And then of course Abizi for such a long time was he's going to have so many interactions. He's pretty much going to cause all the chaos, and Simp might clean some of that up. But today it was a little bit different, or this weekend it was different because he doesn't have those guys. It's a very different system for them, but he still performed like incredibly well throughout, even with the losses and stuff. He dropped 10 in the S&D, the first S&D. Obviously, the second one was just a wipe, so it didn't even really matter. But he looked awesome. And the second thing is 04 looked really good against Paris, especially those last three maps. He went 33 and 20 in Overload. He went 28 and 24. He was the only FaZe player that went positive in the exposure hardpoint loss. And then map 5, he goes 8 and 2. Abuza goes 8 and 1, and they just completely roll Paris in the search. So if 04 can be that kind of guy, and from what we saw with Vancouver, he can be that guy. He can be like really additive to, like you said, Neptune last year. If it's Simp this year, all of this can really work out very well for FaZe. But the biggest thing is they got to win this weekend. This was not something that we expected, obviously, because we picked against them in both of these matches. And we said that it was a very realistic possibility that they start the season 0-2. The fact that they went 1-1, even if they drop another match at some point when they're not supposed to in these qualifiers, it's really good that they were able to get a win here and avoid that 0-2 start, and show that they could beat one of the top 4 teams in Paris. Let's go back to the Saturday matches. Starting December 6th, Toronto versus Miami, another former teammates clash. Obviously, Real going from Miami to Toronto over the offseason. We also get the debut of Trakes, the first South American player in CDL history. And they're, you go back to our last podcast, we talked about it. Like, we didn't know if he was going to be in the lineup to start this season because he had visa issues that kept him out of the Monster Invitational. Miami had not really said anything. I don't even know if they really knew anything about him, like if they were going to be able to get him for sure for the season debut. I did see one of the Miami guys say that they had like canceled a scrim with OpTic because he flew in that day, so they couldn't play them. And then there was some kind of banter from the OpTic point of view of like they're practicing like champs. They won't play us because, or they won't scrim us because we play like in a week or two or whatever. But I mean, he looked horrible to start this series. He had a really bad first map, 11 and 22, double negatives, not really what you're looking to start your CDL career with. Toronto went up 131-0, which is one of the biggest scoreless streaks that I can remember to start a hardpoint, at least in recent history. They end up winning 250 to 85. They 100-point club Miami. And then Miami kind of settles in from there. Round 11 S&D. 8-0 exposure overload for Toronto. Again, Trakes has like a really, really bad map. Then he bounces back. He goes 25-20 in the hard point that Miami wins. And then the S&D, Toronto ends up taking the series with a 6-3 win. So some good, some bad for Trakes, which is kind of maybe what you expect out of just any player starting their CDL season or starting on their CDL career, that isn't like simp or Celium or something, like where, they're just these gods that basically just got into Call of Duty because it was like their birthright. Trakes in the final S&D, he went 7-6, so he was the only player on his team that went positive in the second S&D. So first thoughts on Trakes' debut, and I guess a really great win for Toronto to start their season.
Yeah, I think there was some good banter on the timeline afterwards. I think I was probably expecting a little bit more. I even saw before the match, like Toronto put something out, like a teaser for the match, and it was something like they poked fun at the verbal agreement part of
Yeah.
the whole Real situation. I thought that was funny. But yeah, I mean that was honestly the start of this series. I really I had my attention more on Toronto than Miami, truthfully, just because I've been really excited about Real in the past, and Kleenex on the AR. It looked like uh, you know, nothing had changed for the tissue still being an issue there. So I was really excited about that. But yeah, I do think alluded to it earlier in the show when I was just making an example, but from a more analytical perspective here when we're actually talking about their match, this is just only one match. We don't know how much actual practice they were able to get, they being Miami, with Trakes in the lineup due to the whole visa situation. And they don't have another match this week. So we literally only got to see them play in this series. Um, might be another case of, they have to, put in some work over this next week to try and rebound a little bit in a week where they're playing more matches and get more practice in with Drake. So maybe again, without knowing any inside info or anything like that, I just think it would be very hard for this Miami team with a brand new player who doesn't have previous CDL experience to just absolutely fry with limited practice due to a visa situation. So I would say it's undeniable for it to not have had some sort of impact on the result of this series. They still, put up a fight, and I honestly thought when it was going to a game 5, like we saw Miami win multiple series last year in game 5 because they were so strong at search, and I thought, that's a mode where if Rancor Metals and Super are able to just carry over their success in search, it didn't really need to necessarily matter how Trakes did, and obviously Trakes did play pretty well in the searches, so that's a good sign in my opinion for the potential of this Miami team. But yeah, I just think we're gonna have to see more of Miami before we can truly judge them. I think this was always going to be a tough match, especially with the added uh, adrenaline and however you want to phrase it, with Real playing against his former team. I don't think that was like really a fire was lit under the Miami guys. Like I think it was more of a one-sided rivalry from like Real most likely wanting to beat the org as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, like, it seems like everything we heard in the offseason. Real and his former Miami teammates are all good and everything like that. So that's what makes me think maybe like Real just had a little bit more fire and really wanted to stick it to his former org. I don't really know, but yeah, end of the day, this was an absolutely awesome series, and especially considering the circumstances surrounding Miami, this is one that I hope we see this showdown between these two teams many, many times this year. Um, just because the more we see it, the more excited it'll be, and possibly more storylines, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a match that we'll see in like winners round 1 of a lot of tournaments or like winners semis. That just kind of feels that how it'll go. I thought
Yeah.
what was interesting was Miami actually picked Scar Hardpoint in the series that they lost 250 to 85. So I don't
Wow.
know what that means, if that's just a fluke, like Drake's had a horrible first map, it just nerves and whatever. But I did think it was interesting that they picked that map, and then obviously Toronto picked the Den hard point that Miami won. But like that's 250
Interesting.
199. So but yeah, I think I was definitely more interested in Miami because of Trakes, like just not knowing what he is coming into this, and I have really high expectations for this team. If he's able to pan out, then this team could be like we really could have like a top 5, top 6, like very solidly locked in to start the season. With the top 4 that we've already been mentioning, plus Toronto and Miami. I think that's a very likely possibility, but Miami does have to iron out some of the kinks, and I'm sure having Trakes in the country, hopefully practicing regularly, hopefully that'll help him and help the team as a result. But yeah, great first win for Toronto. Next up, we had Vancouver versus Paris. This kind of went how I thought it would. Obviously, we've just talked about pretty much all off season since Vancouver's roster had been reported that it just didn't seem like a team that was going to be very competitive to start the season. It was really just, hey, it's a long-term play. Hopefully in a month or 2, 3 months that these guys will kind of gel and there will be improvement, there will be development, and we'll see some results then, but not now. And that's kind of what we got here. Paris is one of the best teams in the league, and they just beat up on Vancouver 250 to 152, 6-3, and then a 4-1 overload. Nothing really that jumped out to me. Anything jump out to you in the series?
Yeah, in that first map there, saw Envoy using the Razor SMG, which I just thought was, I guess you can look at it from two ways. It was possibly like Envoy being like, not thinking highly of this
Yeah.
Vancouver team and just wanting to try something a little off meta out, or he genuinely thinks the Razor is a good option on Colossus, which is probably one of the smaller maps. So that might be something to keep an eye on. See maybe if there's a little meta development there, because it's been a long time since we've had like more than a two gun meta, and let alone even like multiple options within the same section of weapon in terms of multiple ARs or multiple SMGs. So that's something that I'm weird like that, and I always love those like little kinks uh, in the meta and developments or whatever. So I'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, there was also the listening for the overload. Envoy literally said like at one point like Legend is the last guy and he's lost, and I thought that was really funny. Envoy kind of clarified in response to the tweet saying like he was just like trying to like rally the troops a little bit and get them hyped up, and pointing out that he was the last player alive maybe like inspired the boys to push and like get a little more aggressive. So I thought that was funny, but yeah, from Paris's perspective, the Gentlemates, and strong win. You expected them to take this one, especially for their first uh, showing in the actual CDL action. I know we already talked about them for the phase perspective, but for Vancouver, it definitely was a tough draw to kick things off, and I'm not gonna, uh, you know, harp on anything too much for them because this is a team. Again, I said I expected them to have a slow start, literally have a guy starting on the team who has no professional Call of Duty experience or competitive Call of Duty experience and is immediately competing at a professional level. So we got to give him some time there. But Gwen, like, another day for Gwen at the office where he was just dropping numbers and the team around him just not giving him any help. And we saw that with Carolina. And in this series, he had 36 map one, 32 for the loss and the overload. And I put down in the note here because obviously we like talking basketball. For sometimes it feels like, I don't remember what OKC's record was the year that Russ won MVP when he was averaging a triple double. And obviously, I don't want to compare Gwyn performing like this to like an MVP standard or anything like that, but that was just the first thing that came to my mind. It's like, yeah, Gwen's dropping all-star numbers, and it just doesn't matter because the team's getting dominated. So we'll have to see how that develops for Vancouver over the year. But I hope for Gwen's sake, at least, that it's not another year where he's, especially online, the whole Gwinternet thing. I don't want to I mean, it's good for him if he keeps on dropping numbers online, but I would, for his sake, I think it would be good if some of those numbers translated to wins.
Yeah, I mean, this would really, if they end up being really bad, then this is kind of like an Octane Seattle Surge moment where people are like, yeah, Octane might be the best AR in the league, but he plays on one of the worst teams in the league, so it doesn't really matter, does it? Yeah, he looked awesome. That's never in doubt. It's just the other guys that, there's just so much unproven talent there that, they're just going to eventually have to prove it. But yeah, like you, I think we both said basically you have to let them go until basically like major two. And like major two is kind of
Yeah.
like all right, like let's evaluate what we have here. Do we need to make a change at this point? Because then that'll give you like 18 qualifying matches, 2 majors. Like you'll
Even
have so
more.
much
Yeah.
time. And you'd have a bunch of practice in between. So you would have a lot of data, a lot of proof in the pudding, basically, to decide where you want to go with the team. Right now, it's all up in the air, and you just kind of let them go. Like Puckett saying whatever, like they're lost in S&D. Like I mean, that's just how it goes. Like they don't play S&D in Halo, so it's it's just gonna be something that I think is going to be a major work in progress. They're probably the only team that we have in the CDL this season where it's very clear that this is like a development oriented team. Everybody else seems like we're kind of trying to compete. Like we might have some guys that we're trying to develop, but like we feel like we could get to champs. I don't know if Vancouver really feels super confident about getting to champs this season.
And I think that is an interesting point you just made because it just made me think of a clip that I saw from the flank. I don't know which episode it would have been. It had to have been either yesterday's or Friday's. So most likely was Friday's because they were talking about XNIT and they were basically, I think it was maybe Parasite and Ben going back and forth a little bit talking about like how if you wanted XNIT to develop, you wouldn't have like a very, very expensive
Yeah.
core roster of like Pred and Selim around him. Like, I don't remember who was saying what in that, so I don't want to put words in either of their mouth. But that does bring that's an interesting point where that's the difference between Vancouver and Falcons in my eyes is that Vancouver is very clearly trying to develop these guys on this team, whereas Falcons, it feels like they want to win and they want to spend on the best available talent, but they also want XNED to be a part of it, and that's where it's like it's not fully committing to winning or fully committing to development. It's kind of in the middle of both, and that is an interesting thing we'll have to keep an eye on from Falcons. But final thing on this match for me, shout out to Chance, who was calling Ghosty La Fantôme in a French accent, and I thought that was incredible. I don't know if that's like his own thing or if that's like a Gentlemates fan dubbing of his name or whatever, but I am fully embracing that, and Ghosty played really well this weekend too.
Last thing I'll say on Vancouver is they kind of remind me of LAT when they did the rebuild with Ghosty and Joe
Okay.
Deceives and them, like that team where it wasn't expected that they would compete. Obviously, by the end of the season, they were like a really competitive team, and I think
Yeah.
they went to EWC Grand Finals. So like that's like I think the really the best outcome there is to have that team where they basically just, I mean, they changed some things throughout the year, but like for the most part, they were like, we're going to leave them alone. We're going to let them develop throughout the season together, and hopefully we can find something at the end of the year. That's kind of how I feel. But on your point about with XNID is like that's a thing. That's a thing in traditional sports too, especially like in basketball. When you draft a player and you put them on a competitive team that's like really trying to win a championship, that can sometimes really backfire and be very detrimental for those players because they're not going to get as much playing time. They don't get as much of a long enough leash to kind of make the mistakes that they need to develop because all you're thinking about is like, we really need to win this game. We can't have some rookie, turn the ball over 7 or 8 times a game. We just kind of need to win. And there's a case to be made that Exnid is kind of, a disservice is being done to him by Vegas if he's a part of that roster where it's obvious that everybody else is fully developed and that they're kind of ready to compete for a championship. And here's a guy who, his development is going to be kind of stunted because he's only going to develop as far as that role with all of these superstars. as long as that role can actually let him, or as much as that role can let him develop. And I think that's going to kind of stunt his development. I don't know how great he would be or anything, regardless, but that is kind of the argument for why you would want to put a player in challengers regardless. Is just like he can kind of be the star of the team. He can develop these skills that maybe he won't use on a regular basis once he gets to the CDL, but he has that ability to develop into that, and we can kind of see what he is before we bring him up to the CDL. But obviously we'll see with Vegas, we'll see what Vancouver, what kind of development works here. I'm very interested to see particularly what Vancouver is able to do. It's either going to be a complete disaster, or and I think it could work really well. I don't think there's a ton of in between, because Vivid is already kind of a known quantity, even though people like to doubt his land stuff. But this weekend was definitely a step in the right direction for the Gwyn boys. Appreciate you, the Dark, in the YouTube chat, said W Podcast Boys. Appreciate you for stopping by. I also saw Kevin and Sixes in the YouTube chat, so appreciate you guys. Next match on the calendar was G2 versus C9, which was a very interesting match because obviously these were the two breakout teams when we had the Monster Invitational. No one really expected them to be that competitive, and yet they were. And then to start this series, C9 wins the opening hardpoint. G2 ends up winning S&D and Overload. C9 forces game 5, 250-225 in the hardpoint. And then it goes to S&D, and G2 wins. So G2 wins both of these S&Ds rather convincingly. What do you take away from this? Because I would say that G2, I definitely have the higher expectation for G2 just in general. But like you mentioned in the preseason, C9, it would make sense if they were really good out of the gate and some of these other teams were trying to catch up with them. So what were you what jumped out to you, or what surprised you the most in tonight's or yesterday's match?
Yeah, I think that the fact that this was a 3-2, regardless of the which team ended up winning or individual modes or whatever, just the fact this was a close series in the end kind of did, in my mind, both of these teams have that potential to be a dark horse squad that can maybe cause some upsets, cause some chaos in the brackets and whatnot. Again, not expecting them to be championship contenders overnight, but I think they are a team that could, maybe get hot at the right time and make a push to a top 5 or 6 finish, and maybe even punch in or try and get in for that last championship Sunday spot at a major. We'll have to see, but overall, I think I'll kind of now I'll hold off on that. I was going to combine this with OpTic, but it is weird in my head that C9 won both hard points in this series, and G2 wins the searches, and that in my head makes a little sense for G2 to be good at search, because that's something I expect from Skies in past iterations. Been a good search and destroy player, been a very clutch S&D player, and I do think there is good S&D players on C9, especially Vivid and Kremp. Or Kremp's on Minnesota, so I messed that up. But Vivid didn't have the best game in game 5, so that could maybe have had an impact on the S&D performance of C9. But historically, I think Vivid's been a pretty solid S&D player, and I would have expected C9 to put up a fight in some of these searches, but maybe just G2 is a better search team. But then we go to their match today against OpTic, and with what I knew about G2 from the previous day, G2 pulls off an upset in the map 1 against OpTic, and I'm like, oh boy, if G2 takes this search, we're looking at OpTic being down 0-2. What are we going to be talking about later? Well, then OpTic wins the search, and I completely don't really know what to expect now from, whether that's just an OpTic being OpTic and it not necessarily mattering from an individual gameplay perspective, but we'll get to that OpTic G2 in a little bit. I'm kind of rambling. So, yeah, overall G2 versus C9. I think both of these teams are better than maybe some people expected and could cause some upsets here and there. I think you mentioned earlier, keeping track of highest kills so far. I think that goes to Afro in the game 4 hardpoint. He dropped 43 on Scar hardpoint. That's a name Obviously, we've talked about it on previous episodes. I'm really happy Afro's back in the CDL, seeing him do his thing, drop numbers like that's pretty cool. And yeah, C9 wins the hard points. G2 pulls off a Neslo, wins both searches, and I was impressed with Estriel in this series. I think this following the following series for G2, we saw a little bit more of the other guys picking up, and doing their thing, but Estriel's kind of stood out to me in this series. And yeah, Mamba, they were talking on they interviewed Mamba after the series. Apparently he was like a cattle rancher or something, like an IRL cattle rancher
Oh,
for
cool.
job last year while playing in challengers. And Puckett like asked him something about boots, like wearing boots to events, and Mamba says, yeah, I'm gonna wear the boots to events or whatever. So I thought that was kind of unique. You don't hear about that, but shout out Mamba. He had a pretty strong rookie debut here.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for G2 to win this match, especially because they played OpTic today. And, we talked about it with FaZe. Like, going 0-2 is not ideal to start your season. And, C9 really gave them all they could handle, particularly in the respawns. I just think it was a really good win for Minnesota. I've said it before. Like, I'm not really a believer in Skies, and he did not have his best performances yesterday, but they won, so that's kind of really all that matters in the end, right?
I will say Maven brought it up, I believe, during the series. The same thing we talked about before. Minnesota loses that map 4, and in the back of my head, and Maven said it too. It's like, oh, here we go again, another map 5 for Minnesota. They're gonna lose it and have another 2-3 loss, but they were able to clutch this up. So we'll have to see if the 3-2 trend continues more after this weekend for Minnesota.
And then Sunday, December 7th, we had LAT versus Falcons to start off the matches. And Falcons end up just coming out super hot. They win the opening hard point, 250 to 236. Exonid, who we've been talking shit on, like nearly dropped 40 kills, 39 and 30. Pred goes for 35. Just like a really like high kill map from pretty much everybody. But then LAT was like, all right, guys, like let's lock in a little bit. Maybe Nate Shot got in the call and said, like, I'm going to drop each and every one of you if you lose this match. 6-0 SND, 5-1 Overload, and then another really competitive hard point, 250 to 207, but LAT wins this one. I mean, like, I think the good thing, if you're a Falcons fan and you watch this week, you go 0-2, but there were some really good things that you saw from your team. First, the fact that you were able to beat LAT in hardpoint is a really promising sign. And you were competitive in the second map. You played OpTic in the first map. And like you mentioned, even though it was like a 100-point win, it was very competitive for a good bit of that. And OpTic just pulled away at the end. Falcons was also pretty competitive against OpTic and S&D. We've talked about OpTic and S&D just like historically not their strongest game mode, but I think there's some really good things to think about for Falcons, even though you're 0-2. And LAT, this is like just the best possible outcome. Obviously, you don't want to lose a hard point to Falcons, but at the end of the day, you are 2-0, and there are definitely you're still getting used to this team. Like, this isn't just kind of rolling into the season. Just maybe you changed one thing, maybe you tweaked something, but you didn't change your roster. Like, this is half of the team is new, even though Kenny is returning. You're getting a BZ and Hydra together. I think this is pretty much a really great outcome for how this week went. What did you think for both teams tonight?
Yeah, I think kind of like you said, like we were talking a lot about Xnid, and this was a pretty surprising performance from him, and it's one that that's what you got. If you are a believer in Xnid and the Falcons project, a performance like this is something that gives you hope for what could be with this team. And obviously, it's just one map at the start of the season. Um, if I have to be a little pessimistic in terms of the Falcons camp, Hydra going 19 or 34 or whatever he ended up actually going in that map one is probably the biggest contributor to Falcons winning. And at the end of the day, Hydra's going basically double negative and you only win by 14. Like,
Yeah.
there's going to be that's probably going to be one of less than 10 times Hydra goes double negative in a respawn this year, if I had to guess. Um, but you just think about this team and kind of like you said, like both hard points in this series, 250, 235, 36 with the win. They put up 207 in the second hard point where they lose to LAT, and then like 150 against OpTic when they lost, but it was closer early on. If you think about this team, like, and mostly the guys that they are allegedly paying the premium price for in terms of Pred and Celium, those are two guys you expect to drop like huge slaying numbers in the respawns. And I know Celium's been an S&D kid, and you could probably question what mode you actually think Celium is better in, whether it's hardpoint or search. But I think just based on the KDs he's put up over the years, you expect him to be a really strong hardpoint player. And Pred, they're both guys like thinking back over the years that are in like top five for KDs overall when the seasons are coming to an end. So it makes sense thinking in retrospect about this team potentially being good in hardpoint. It's just gonna like a 6-0 in the search for LAT, and both of the overloads this weekend I don't think were necessarily too close for them. But it is interesting to me that Falcons are potentially stronger in hardpoint than some people maybe wanted to give them credit for. But I do think if you think about it a little bit deeper, it kind of makes sense that that would be the mode, especially, based on scrims and everything. They're probably playing more hardpoint than they're playing search. It would just make a little bit more sense with the guys they have on this team that they could be a better hardpoint team. But then you think about search, like Celium and Kismet should be strong search players for them too. So I don't really know. Um, I do think we'll keep an eye on Falcons, especially like I don't want to get into it too deep because we'll talk about it next episode when we're previewing the next matches. But I think this upcoming week will be a better test for Falcons in terms of what we can expect. If they come out and struggle in this next week against teams that aren't OpTic and LAT, I think that's a bigger indicator of potentially bad things to come for them. But then if they come out and have a strong week in this upcoming week, then maybe Falcons is a better team than some people wanted to give them credit for um, heading into this season. So we'll have to wait and see. But overall, yeah, it was definitely interesting to see them win map 1. But after that, LAT, especially maps 2 and 3, dominated, and then they took care of business in the map 4. The stat I teased earlier that I saw, shout out Brian Stats on Twitter, Abizi is now officially 11-0, the first time playing against his former teammates in this series. Of course, he played against Celium for the first time after earlier in the weekend playing against Sim for the first time. That's just a pretty absurd stat.
Yeah, I think, while I said there's a lot of good that you can take away from this Riyadh performance, Kismet was like really bad. Like pretty much this entire weekend. Like he had like some good maps, but especially this LAT series, it was like a really rough go for him. And that, like, if they don't have a good week next week, that's going to be like really scary for a Kiz believer that like if it comes down between Exnid and Kiz on this roster of like who do we need to swap out to improve this roster, I think like we know how Falcons will decide to go with that roster. And he just didn't look good like really at all. Granted, he's in a tough spot because like with New York, like Skies was like a good slayer, but like Skies was not like, especially New York Skies, this is a little bit different than when he was with Florida, but like Skies wasn't Celium, right? He wasn't like I will drop like a 1.5 if you let me off the chain, I will turn the map upside down. And Pred is kind of like that too. He didn't really have that in New York. He was more relied on to be, I guess, just more involved in the slaying. It's not as important if he does that here, especially if Xned's going to drop 39 in hardpoint. Like, you might as well kick your feet back and do some of the other stuff. But, Overload, he went 19 and 30. He was the only player that didn't have 20 kills on his team. He goes 21 and 30 in the second hardpoint. The first match against OpTic. He didn't have anything over a .83 KD. He went 14 and 25 in overload. So like just a really bad week from him. Maybe it's just two really tough matches against OpTic and LAT,
Yeah.
potentially 1 and 2 in the league or 1 and 3 or whatever. But it's something to keep an eye on as we move forward. And for LAT, this is awesome. Like you start 2-0. These matches you played phase and somehow you were like a little, not more dominant, but you didn't lose a map to phase while you lost a map to Falcons. Like, I feel like that's just a good outcome for them. And Kenny also played pretty well, so maybe he'll
Yeah.
shut me up. Next up, phase
Just real
versus,
quick,
yeah.
I was just gonna say I couldn't find it. I was just looking for it while you were talking, but I did see a clip of Scump and Methods talking on the watch party about Kismet,
Mm-hmm.
and they were I know I saw it, but I can't find it right now. They were talking about like his pacing potentially being an issue and trying to if they were if I remember correctly, they were saying like it felt like he was trying to play slower to match the slower pace of the team, and that might hinder his results. So that'll be something we have to keep an eye on, and I think that's just something we naturally discussed when the whole roster mania thing was going on. We felt like they needed another AR player to come into this picture. So maybe like Kismet having to play that flex and potentially a second AR more might impact these early results, and we'll just have to keep an eye on it, like you said.
Phase versus Gentlemates, we already talked about. So we'll go to the final match of the weekend, OpTic versus G2. Um, Again, G2 comes out kind of similarly to Falcons and LAT. G2 comes out, they win hardpoint to start the series, which is obviously a pretty big shock because OpTic is OpTic, and literally regardless of the roster, hardpoint is something that you could usually expect them to win. But G2 wins this. Mamba, our cattle rancher, our local cattle rancher, he had 34 kills. Kremp 33, Skies 30, getting a little bit of revenge on his former team of like whatever a month and a half last season. And then OpTic, they really buckle up. They win the Surge 6-4, which I'm sure you want to talk about. Then Overload, they win 3-0, and then they absolutely demolish G2 on the final map, Exposure Hardpoint. It was pretty close to a 100-point club, and then G2 got in, like, they broke a hill, and then it was like, all right, like, let's end this one. And Dashy just had, like, an incredible performance in that map. So OpTic starts 2-0 as expected. G2, not as expected, or, yeah, I guess expected. They go 1-1, but looked pretty good against the best team in the league. I think, like, Falcons, there's a lot of good things to take away from this match, and no one really expected them to beat OpTic anyway. So overall thoughts on the final match of the weekend?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say for G2 really. Like I think a lot of people again were expecting Optic 3-0 25-minute series here, and the fact G2 was look competitive in several of the maps and actually won a map is speaks volumes to the potential. It might not actually um you know it might not actually indicate how strong of a team G2 is, but I think it shows a little bit more than potentially what a 3-0 loss would have. So that's just um, interesting to think about. But yeah, like you said, it did start out with Shotzi in the opening hardpoint. It was either the first life or one of the first lives he took Sky's hostage and like got a hip fire kill from one of the top windows on Scar. So I thought that was funny. Just a little bit. I can just imagine what the game chat sounded like. But um, Shotzi did struggle the first couple maps, and I was getting ready to like I'm like, oh boy, what's Aches gonna tweet? What's he gonna have to say after this performance after the first two maps? But then Shotzi uh, did superstar things in map three and turned it around after that. So that was that put that potential notion to bed pretty quickly. But yeah, kind of like I was saying earlier with G2, I thought Estriel played pretty well. He played very well in the series against C9, and then especially in this map one here, it was really the other three guys like did their thing, and maybe that's a little more indicative of what we talked about last year with Minnesota, just like the consistency issues. Um, with Geo, Nero, and Estriel, we always said like one series, one guy would pop off, and then the next another guy would. So that brought up that in my mind. Again, it's a small sample size here this year. I liked what I saw from Estriel in the opening series, but something I'm going to be mindful of when watching G2 going forward, but not overly concerned or anything like that. I still think Estriel's super gross, and he had moments even in this series where I was like, how did he had like a two piece at one point on this hard point? I was like, damn, that was gross. So, um, the big thing we were alluding to earlier for me in this search and destroy, Raid S&D, got to see Raid at least. Obviously, the old head in me was happy about seeing that in action, and to see Mercules, our pick for MVP, pull off a ninja defuse and a 1v2 in the same map. That was just a thing of beauty. I saw him going for the ninja defuse, and I was like, he's got this in the bag, and I was just like that's, you know, to some casual people or casual fans or whatever, they might not think much of it. But for somebody who's so young in the CDL to like have the cojones to go for a ninja defuse like that in this situation, and like there's other guys who wouldn't have even thought about that. And it's not even that serious because it's just an online match. But I was like that's a mature move to go for the ninja there, because especially when Mercules is in this position, he's getting all hyped up and stuff. The G2 guys were probably expecting him to chow somewhere, and they're like buddied up trying to trade out the kill when Mercules chows, and he's just like, no, I'm not gonna chow you guys. I'm just gonna get the defuse and get the round win. So I really like that. And then the 1v2, that was just another sick play out of him. So seeing him again playing on a map that he was probably 5 years old, or we talked about this on another episode. I don't know how old he would have been when Raid was originally released, but it wasn't very old, and he probably couldn't have even played it. But um, that's cool to see him putting on a show like that, and that was my big takeaway from this series. Was I liked what I saw out of him in that search and destroy. And Dashy, haven't really talked about him, but going with two KD in the map 4 win, that's big Brucey things right there too.
Yeah, he was 9 when Raid came out, so
There you go.
makes everybody probably watching this feel very, very old. But yeah, he just the best player in the world, and you know those are the kind of the signature moments that the best players typically have, even though it's like not like a clip where you know he's pulling off an insane 3-piece or anything, but it's ninjas are very, very exciting. And online matches, ninjas are like the most pure because we don't have those idiots that are screaming about ninjas on land. So very happy to see it happen. OpTic obviously 2-0. The standings after week 1 of the CDL season, OpTic and LAT are both 2-0. Then you have Boston and Toronto at 1-0. Paris, G2, and FaZe all at 1-1. Miami, Cloud9, Carolina, and Vancouver all at 0-1, and then Riyadh Falcons at 0-2. So obviously a tough start for the Surge, who were the only team that did not win a map this weekend. Unfortunate, but yeah, this kind of in some ways like this is what you expect because OpTic and LAT being at the top. Paris, Toronto, FaZe, like in kind of like the upper to middle pack. And then Vancouver, Falcons, Carolina, C9. Those are the teams that you would typically expect near the bottom. There are some differences like Miami and Boston right now, but things will work themselves out over the course of these qualifiers, which will continue next week. We will be back to talk about the second week's matches, probably on the 9th, well, definitely on the 9th or 10th. I'm not exactly sure which day that will be. So that will be the date of the live stream. And obviously, if we do the live show on the 9th, then the podcast will go up on the 10th. If we do it on the 10th, it'll go up on the 11th. But the matches will return on the 12th, regardless of when we do our show, if that makes you guys feel any better. The Pick'em through week 1, you are 7-2. I am 6-3. Basically, me picking against Boston really screwed me because you were going to pick the opposite.
Miami.
Oh yeah, Miami too.
No, that was the only one. We both picked Carolina against Boston.
Yeah, I know.
I picked Toronto.
Oh, okay.
And you picked Miami. That was the only difference.
Yeah, but I should have been picking Boston. I don't know what I was thinking. And regardless, long season. I don't even remember how many matches we picked last year. Like it's in the notes from last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But it's like a few hundred, like I don't know, or
Okay.
140 or whatever. So a long time to go for us in terms of that. Um, Gerald Tarrant, he said in the YouTube chat, here to support, saw you guys in the feed with a few viewers, so wanted to support a growing channel, lock in. Appreciate you, Gerald, and appreciate all of you guys who tuned in. I had a few people on the YouTube Sixes, Kevin, The Dark, and Gerald stop by during the show, so really appreciate you guys. Obviously, I think people typically kind of swing by after the Sunday matches because obviously YouTube and people just kind of stick around with the CDL. So always very appreciative. Love that, and hope you guys continue to tune in throughout the 2026 season, which will it got off to a really nice start. We had one delay. We have several thousand more to go. So stick through with us as we go through that. Please make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening, watching on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at JBank with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I said, we'll be back at some point in the middle of the week to talk about the week 2 matches and whatever news comes out. Maybe we'll get the news of who won the NA Challengers Cup at that point. I did check while you were talking and I did not see anything. So it's 10:30 Eastern. That tournament started like a really long time ago and it's still not over yet, which is very on brand. So maybe we'll get it by the next show. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah. Like Preston said, thank you guys as always for all the support. Appreciate everyone who stopped by in the YouTube chat. Preston already read off your names. I'm not going to repeat it, but appreciate all you guys. And appreciate the support on all the YouTube videos recently too. The last couple YouTube videos have been some of our most viewed in a while, so appreciate that. I hope everybody's getting excited for the season, and that'll continue on as we actually get into the nitty gritty here. But yeah, week 1 is done. Got another week coming up, and we'll be back at some point next week to give you our preview and predictions for the last set of matches before the holiday break. So looking forward to that. Thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.